Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking to W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup. Curtis has specialized in storage, backup, and retrieval since 1993. He's worked as an expert witness and a consultant, and he's written 4 books on the topic. He now works as the Chief Technical Evangelist at Druva, and he also hosts a podcast on the topic and maintains a website called backupcentral.com. We're going to talk about all that and more, but first off, let's welcome Curtis. Curtis, how are you today?
Awesome. This is my first podcast recording of the year.
Wow, great. Well, Happy New Year, and this is a great kickoff for 2022. And I read on your LinkedIn profile you're down in Oceanside.
I am.
So I'm assuming you have much better weather than I do. I'm up the same coast as you, but all the way up in the Seattle-Bellevue area, and we just got rid of our snow.
I definitely have superior weather, but you have much greener things. I'm a big fan of Seattle. My wife actually went to a college that's no longer there in Everett. So I spent some time
What college was that?
Seattle. I forgot the name of it. It was a Bible college, a Christian college, but it was, I think it was just called Puget Sound Christian College. And she went there, and my son-in-law is from
Woodinville
Bridge? Woodinville. Yeah. So I've been in and around Seattle quite a bit. And I did a lot of work for Amazon back 100 years ago.
Yeah, well, it's a nice area. It's obviously changed a lot. Microsoft changed the whole world up here, and then with Amazon and everybody else moving in. But you're right, it is very green, and it's super, super nice for about 6 weeks during the summer. One of my favorite places is the San Diego coast, starting from kind of like Del Mar north to where you're at. So. I guess the grass is always greener, but this time of the year, I think you've got us beat. So tell me a little bit about, you specialize in storage, backup, and retrieval. And why is that so important in the context of companies who are moving their digital assets to the cloud? Because a lot of cloud providers will tell you that they do have backup services, et cetera. So why is it important?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would actually argue that backup and recovery and disaster recovery are even more important today than they were when I got started in this industry, when many of your listeners probably weren't even alive yet. Yeah. The thing is that in the cloud, and I'm a huge fan of the cloud, of virtualization and of cloud services and cloud, virtual resources and SaaS solutions. But the reality of all of those things is that they are a single command away from disappearing, right? Meaning that it used to take a fire or a natural disaster or a flood or something to take out your data center. Nowadays, a single command from a ill-intentioned person can delete your entire environment. And a perfect example of that, there was a company, their name is escaping me, but they were a company that their entire environment was in Google Cloud. And they use G Drive for everything. They stored all of their data, all of their company IP. So they were a very cloud forward company, right? And they had all of that in Google Drive. And then one day, a well-intentioned system administrator deleted what he thought was a test account. And what he did was he actually deleted the company's production account. And in a moment, the entire intellectual property of this company ceased to exist. And
so probably did that person. They probably just ceased to exist too.
At least the guys in it's like Thanos snapping his fingers. And right. The thing is, they filed a lawsuit. They're like, where's our data? It's like, it's not in your service contract, right? The backups are not in your service contract unless they are. There are actually a handful of, the IaaS vendors and SaaS vendors that do offer backup as part of their solution, but the vast majority of them do not. And whether they offer it or don't, that's a different discussion as to whether or not you should use a service being provided by the same thing that you're protecting, right? But whether they offer it or not, the fact is that this very virtualized cloud world is a single command away from ceasing to exist for any given company.
So you use Google Drive,
right.
but in the case of, let's say, an enterprise user of AWS, Azure, I would assume that they have some kind of redundancy built in that if somehow somebody deletes or removes your data, that they could restore it from a previous backup. I would think that's automated. Now, not being a data expert, but go ahead. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, so that would be a very, very bad assumption to make. So when I say G Drive, I'm talking about that was G Suite, right? This was a product that somebody was paying for their entire company. So they were a Google Apps company. The company I work for, Druva, we use Google Apps, right? Or now called G Suite. And we use the Gmail, we use the calendaring feature, we used the online drive. I'm a fan of all of that, and that's what that company did. And there is absolutely zero backup of that service, and the same goes true for Azure, AWS, Microsoft 365, Salesforce, all of these really big, really important services. They do have redundancy built in. Often, not necessarily always, but often they do have redundancy, but redundancy is not backup. Redundancy is what happens when, the Seattle data center goes offline and the LA data center takes over. But if you or a black hat, a bad actor, if you or a bad actor deletes your account or deletes a significant portion of your account, or you get a ransomware attack that encrypts your entire account, there is no back button in that backup. The only thing they have, and again, they don't even all have this, is the ability to resume after a major disaster takes out their data center. That is not the same thing as what happens when somebody deletes your data.
And if they were to, in that scenario, there's a disaster that takes out the data from this data center. They're gonna pull the data from another data center where they're mirroring that data, right?
Again, well, it depends on the service, right? This is a giant. I was in consulting for a lot of years. Every answer is it depends, right?
Cool.
For example, so if you think about, you have to talk service by service, but I'll just give you two examples. In AWS, you have S3, which is object storage. It's automatically replicated to 3 locations. That's just the way that's included as part of the service. So if they lose one of those locations, the other 2 locations can simply take over and serve up the data, right? In contrast to that, AWS offers EBS, which is enterprise block storage. And this is what your server is going to need to talk to, right? So if you have a server, a virtual machine in the cloud, a VM, that needs block storage. So that's provided by, I think it's called Elastic Block Storage, EBS. That is only in one, what they call availability zone. So if that data center disappears, so does your data. And that's very well spelled out in any service contract that you read. They will tell you if you're using EBS, if you're using EC2, which is their virtual machine platform, they will tell you that this data it is your responsibility to back up this data.
Yeah. So obviously, with the amount of ransomware the number of ransomware attacks that we're seeing, which is basically daily. And I mean, we only hear about just the huge ones that even report. But I mean, in terms of small, medium-sized businesses, people are getting hit every single day.
Yeah.
And so what would you suggest? Because again, imagine if I had my SMB CEO hat on or CTO hat on, I would be like, oh, well, all of our data is on Azure or AWS, so it should be secure. But what you're saying is, yeah, kind of.
I'm saying it depends. Not.
It depends. Okay, it's absolutely not in the case of a ransomware attack. So tell us a little bit about what you would recommend, and you can go ahead and jump into the Druva solution, and or any other options.
Yeah. So at the very base level, right? So first off, you just have to. The first thing is, don't assume anything. Check your service contract. See what's in your service contract. And I will tell you, if you look at AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft 365, G Suite, Salesforce, these are sort of the big three of each of those. If you look at all of those service platforms, you will find that backup and recovery is simply not part of the solution. Okay, at least not contractually provided. And if it's not contractually provided, I'm going to go back to Judge Judy, right? If it's not in the contract, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist, right? That's one thing I learned watching her many years ago. First off, just sort of acknowledge that, right? It's a bit like, it's like a 12-step acknowledge that you're powerless over data loss. And then the second thing is to investigate alternatives, right? I do believe strongly that it should be a third-party solution. And that's not just because I work for a company that provides a third-party solution. It goes back to this concept called the 3-2-1 rule that we use very frequently in backup and recovery. So it comes from a book written, I think it's like 15 years ago, Peter Krogh. We actually had him as a guest on my podcast. He was a digital photographer, and he sort of distilled all of the general wisdom down to have 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of media, one of which is somewhere else. Back then he said offsite. Now I say somewhere else because offsite is odd when you're in the cloud, right?
Right.
So I would not use, so a perfect example would be right now Salesforce. They have now begun to offer a commercial backup service. You can pay them to back up your data. Without maligning Salesforce, the company, or knowing anything about the details of their backup software product, I would not be a fan of using the product of the service that I'm trying to protect, right? Because of the 2. So the idea of the 2 and the 3-2-1 is to mitigate risk by having things on multiple different types of devices, right? So storing your backup and your primary in the same sort of thing violates that concept. So I would always think of some sort of service. And then I would say that the smaller you are, and I don't want to, I'll say something, then I'm going to qualify. So the smaller you are as a company, the more a cloud-based service is what makes sense for you, right? Don't go and learn about backup and recovery. It's a complicated subject. It's a subject nobody wants to learn about, frankly. I've been in the...
There go all of our listeners right now.
Yeah. It's a complicated subject, right? So don't go investigate the hundreds of options. Use a service where they've already done that for you, and they do all the hard work, and they handle all the physics, and more importantly, or just as importantly, the security. Now, when you go to the opposite end of that spectrum, when you start crossing certain lines of size, if we're not talking the cloud, an on-prem, like if you have an on-premises data center, an on-premises solution might make more sense, but you have to be really big before a cloud-based solution no longer makes sense. So the short answer to your question is, acknowledge that something's wrong. Don't try to become an expert in an area that a lot of people don't want to be an expert in, and just investigate services that can do cloud-to-cloud backup. And yes, Druva backs up. It does that, right? We do it for cloud, for backing up cloud things like IaaS, like AWS. We do the SaaS services. We also do laptop backup as well as data center backup.
Okay, so let's just say I'm on one of those monster clouds, and all of a sudden, you put the fear of God into me, and I said, you know what, we need a backup solution. And now I'm on Google or some other search engine looking for a backup service. What criteria should I use to select a good service?
So I'd say the first and most obvious thing would be, inclusion of the platforms that you use, right? So it's, going with the concepts of decreasing complexity in the IT environment, right? Complexity is bad, right? Complexity equals risk. Try to find a product that handles all of the things that you need to protect. Don't get one service for 365, one service for your AWS environment, one service for your VMware environment, right? Try to get a service that handles all of those things. And then the next thing I would look for is a service that can that views the concepts of security, that they put the concepts of security up front. Things like the data is encrypted before it ever leaves your site. It's encrypted when it's stored. The vendor in question, this is really important if you use a service vendor. The vendor in question should never, with a capital N and italics and underline, never have access to your data, to unencrypted versions of your data. It seems obvious, but there are some really huge vendors that will only tell you that if you ask them a point blank question to that question, right? And say, is there any scenario under which, for example, a government subpoena, if you got a government subpoena for our data, could you provide our data to said entity? And if the answer is yes, then that means somebody has access to your data.
It's interesting too, because the encryption issue is important, even in the context of ransomware attacks, because you may be doing backups, but if you're hit by the right attack and they can exfiltrate your data, you can say, well, so what? So what? We have backups. Yeah, but what if this is a common occurrence as well, is they hit you up with a ransom and they say, if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to release your data and put it out on the web. And guess what? All that IP, all those employee customer records, all that information, everything is just out there. But like you say, if it's encrypted, guess what? It's backed up and encrypted. So you covered up the size.
Yeah, and that goes down that's an incredibly important topic. It goes down a much, it's not a rat hole, but it is a deep well of challenges, because now you start talking about encrypting your primary data. And while I do believe in that concept, there are a lot of challenges with that, right? So regarding the challenge that you talk about, the data being exfiltrated, I think your best defense there, at least what's available today, is the monitoring is like machine learning based monitoring of outgoing traffic, right? If suddenly you see this peak happening, and it's all this data going from your servers to one place, you need a product that looks for that. That's what I think is the best way to protect your on-prem data. But with the backup data, it needs to be encrypted and stored. And there's a big comma here, and stored in a way that will not allow an attack on your primary environment to affect your backup copy, right? Because so many ways of products that are available on the market today, you read so many of these articles about these ransomware attacks, and you see that it attacked both the primary and the backup. And in fact, there are attacks like specifically the Conti ransomware group, CONTI, they specifically target specific backup products. They actually exfiltrate your backups first and then attack you and then tell you, we deleted your backups, we have your backups, right? So it's got to be stored in a way that we use the term air gap, right? In a way that is air gapped from your primary environment, right? So all of that was the second area. The third one is you need scalability. Basically, every time your environment grows, you shouldn't have to call somebody and ask them for more stuff, right? Please grow my environment this size. It should automatically scale to meet your needs, both up and down. And I don't think it should require a huge capital investment. It should be one of the big advantages of the SaaS world is that it's an OpEx play versus a CapEx play. Typically in backup systems for many years, they're giant capital purchases for a big company. It could be a multi-million-dollar purchase of a backup system that you size it for the next 5 years, and then you buy the stuff you need for the next 5 years. Now you spend all this money and most of it goes unused. So that's why I'm a huge fan of this idea of SaaS-based data protection. So if it's just like all the other SaaS stuff where I can just sign up for a service, give you the things I need to give you, like authenticate you to 365, authenticate you to AWS, select the things that I need to back up and say go, and that's all I have to do. I don't know if you could do that with your data, whether it's in a data center or the cloud, then I don't know why you would do it any other way.
Costs. I mean, that's,
it's cheaper than the alternative.
Well, absolutely.
Thanks for that softball answer. No, it's cheaper. No, I'm meaning the only alternative that's cheaper is to not back it up. Right. It's not cheaper than that. But the alternative, meaning buying a big backup server, because you could buy backup products that back up the cloud to your data center. I don't know. It seems weird to do that to me, but you could buy those products. My point is it's buying a service that scales with you. So you don't buy what you need 5 years from now today. You buy just what you need today. Yeah. And then it grows with you as you need. It should be less expensive than the alternative. That's what I'm saying. And certainly less expensive than not doing it.
Exactly. And my point with cost is anytime you introduce a new service, people are, trying to weigh that cost benefit analysis in terms of doing nothing versus doing something. But I would say if you're running a business of any type at all, you can't afford to do nothing in this scenario because what business doesn't run on data?
This is there's a we used to use the term RPE, resume producing event, right? These can be company existential events, meaning that you get the right hit of the right kind and your company just ceased to exist. I have story upon story of that happening to companies because they neglected their core responsibility to protect their data, and then assuming that it's in the cloud, so it's magic. The cloud is awesome, but it's not magic, right? The cloud makes a lot of things possible, but it doesn't change the laws of physics or.
And it's not bulletproof either. I mean, we see the biggest companies in the world still go down once in a while. I mean, Azure's had outages, Facebook recently had outages, and it's like, what? How could Azure be down? It's happened. Office 365, it's they have issues, and if they do, and that's going to affect your business as well, right? So
the problem with with the cloud is it's still run by people, humans ruining everything since forever.
Well, let me ask you one tactical question, and then I want to come back to some of those stories that you alluded to. How often, if we were using a service like the one you described, the service similar to the service that Druva provides, what is the frequency of backup? Now I've got my device here. Is it real time? Is it, how do you determine that?
Yeah, well, it really, it depends.
Okay.
It depends on your requirements, right? So really what it comes down to is in the backup world, we use the terms RTO and RPO, recovery time objective, recovery point objective. How long can is a restore allowed to take, and how much data are we allowed to lose when that happens, right? So the RTO, how quickly the restore happens, that sort of drives the overall design of like how big, like if you're designing a system for your data center, it decides like how big it is, how beefy it is, how fast it can be, right? The RPO is what drives your backup frequency. So most people have an RPO. They have different RPOs in their environment based on the different types of data. So like a database, for example, that's the primary database behind your ordering system, you might have an RPO that's measured in minutes, right? And there are ways to get that data proactively offsite immediately when it's created. But most companies with most servers, something that's measured in hours is what most people shoot for. The number that comes up a lot is 4 hours, maybe 1 hour. And so you set your backup frequency based on that.
Okay,
So
makes it.
And I've by the way, I've seen that frequency be everywhere from, you mentioned continuous. There are continuous backup solutions. I've seen a company that said, hey, if we lose a month's worth of data, it's fine, right? And by the way, they were a paper manufacturer. They're like, the computers in our paper mills, they don't have anything on them that's like critical. So if we back them up once a month, if we can get them back,
right.
Their RTO was weeks, their RPO was months, and I was like, I don't know how to I don't know how to handle this statement, but yeah.
Are there certain regulated industries that have industry requirements or regulations around backups that at a minimum you must?
Absolutely. Certainly, HIPAA is probably one that comes to mind, right? The healthcare regulation. Financial industries have specific requirements. They have regulatory requirements that say that every interaction with a customer must be stored in a way that allows it to be queryable and pulled up. So if a guy says, hey, you promised me a 25% annual return, and they can pull up the conversation and play back the audio. No, I didn't. Right. So certainly there. And now when we look at privacy regulations like the GDPR or CCPA in California, and there's dozens of others around the world, there's an aspect of that. If you store personal data on people subject to that regulation, you must also, you need to protect it both from inappropriate access and also from loss, so that you can be required to back it up for that.
Cool. So tell me, what is an expert witness in the context of storage, backup, and retrieval?
So it depends on the case. Well, I can think of the two biggest cases I've been involved. One was a patent lawsuit, and from what I will easily call a patent troll. And then the other was a insurance lawsuit where the insurance, what are you a client? What are you I guess if you buy insurance, you're the client, right?
Your client, yeah. So the client sued the provider. I have to speak very generically here. Client.
Yeah. I don't know what the right word is, but I know it's agent, the seller, right?
Yeah.
So the insured had some kind of contingency in their insurance that said, in the case of natural disasters, the insurance would pay to relocate the data center. And it was the cheapest level there were all these other levels that the company provided. They went for the cheapest one. And so when there was a flood that was imminent, like it was a seasonal thing, and they knew there was a flood that was imminent. And so they relocated their data center, but they did it in a way where they moved it like real time to another data center in another part of the state, right? And they did it like with very minimal. It was a really impressive move by a pretty big company to move their data from a physical, typical on-prem data center to a colo facility elsewhere on higher ground. And it was a very expensive, like $200 million move.
Wow.
And the contract.
I want the commission on that deal. That's
yeah. The contract that they, the insurance that they had was to literally physically move the servers. Like literally, water is coming in the door. We will physically move your servers to another location, to higher ground. And they were arguing that their move was a physical move, and therefore they should be paid the $200 million, and that they shouldn't have to pay anything other than their deductible. And the insurance company felt otherwise. And in this case, I was actually hired by the insurance company to
the dark side.
The dark side. But the thing was, I, as impressed as I was about how well a judge had already ruled that anything that fell under business continuance to basically make sure that the move didn't disrupt the business, anything that fell under that was not covered. And so I was asked to look at all of their plans and determine what fell under, business continuance or not. So that was and the other was a patent. The other big one was a patent lawsuit where a large software company was being sued by a patent troll that happened to have a patent in a drawer and wasn't doing anything about it. And I helped invalidate the patent by, are you familiar with the term prior art?
No.
In the patent world, there's something called prior art, which is even 10, 20 years later, a patent can be deemed invalid. It should never have been granted because the idea already existed. There was already prior art that did the thing, right? And so I brought my way too many years of experience in the thing to say.
They're like, we want to go way back, and you're like, I can go there.
Yeah, I could go there. I could go there. And basically, I showed and documented that this thing that they got a patent for in 2000 was a thing that we were doing like in the mid 90s.
Wow.
Right. And actually used as a source. Have you ever heard of something called Deja News? Do you remember this?
No.
It was something Google bought. It just became part of the Google archive. But do you know what Usenet was? Actually,
yeah, Usenet. Yeah.
Okay. So Deja News was an archive of everything that was on Usenet.
Wow.
And I was able to pull up Usenet posts from like 1995, illustrating this concept, and that the concept already existed before they patented it. So yeah.
That's
in both of those cases, I was on the big guy's side.
That sounds very, very interesting. You also have a podcast. It's the Restore It All podcast.
Correct.
Correct. Why would you ever do a podcast? Says the podcast host. So, why? What on earth were you thinking?
I just found that I wasn't talking enough on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
Podcasts just. What's funny? Many people had asked me to do a podcast over the years, and I didn't get it. I didn't get the concept of a podcast. And it wasn't until I discovered some podcasts myself and was using them and realizing that there was this real niche of this audio only content. And I was like, I could do that. And I went to a coworker who, interestingly enough, my co-host is, he is like an introvert. Like, he is the complete opposite of me. And when I proposed it, but he's really, really smart. And I proposed it to him.
I thought you were going to say the complete opposite of you. Sorry, man.
Yeah, so that's fair. Touche. So he said, so he was, I said, we're going to do this podcast. He's like, okay, but he had no idea what he was in for. And now we've done, 130 episodes.
That's awesome.
And yeah, we have guests, and we have, sometimes it's what we call an OG podcast, meaning it's just the two of us. But there are so many events, so many things that happen in the news, things like these catastrophic events that I mentioned that prove why it's really important to get a backup. I'll give you a perfect example, one that really drives home the point I was making earlier, but also gives you the kind of thing that we talked. This time last year, there was this giant fire in France. The largest cloud provider that's headquartered in Europe is a company called OVH Cloud. And they had this data center, a multi-story data center based on containers. I don't know if you've ever seen like something built out of, these are like shipping containers, right?
Sure.
So they had this big data center based on shipping containers, and then there was some kind of fire, and it was so intense that their fire suppression system just, I give up, I'm out of here. And so they lost not only that entire building, but the fire was so intense that it took out the building next to it, and that was their second data center.
Wow.
And a lot of people lost their data for two reasons. One is a lot of people assumed that their data was being backed up, and it wasn't. And the second is some people actually paid for, this goes back to my other point, some people paid for the backup service that OVH provided, and the service described that the backup data would be stored physically separate from the data it was backing up. It turns out that just meant it was going to be over in the corner, because a lot of people that actually paid for the backup service lost their data. I just saw in the news last week that a class action lawsuit is being put together in France for people who paid for the backup service and still lost their data.
And are they looking for an expert witness?
I'm trying to get signed up as an expert witness.
I can go to France. I can get paid.
And this time I could be on the good side.
Right,
I could be on the victim side. I did send them in an email, thanks to Google Translate. One problem is I do not speak French. I can say hello and goodbye and where is Jack? Other than that, I would love to be a resource. They have not gotten back to me, but because I was so angry when I heard the people who had actually paid for the backup service, that a technology provider would think that storing the only copy of the data over in the corner was a good idea.
Just gross incompetence, and
gross incompetence.
Yeah. Well, I'm just Person, we're talking about podcast. I actually enjoy doing mine because I get to talk to people like yourself, and I'm always learning. Every person, and because when I first got into cybersecurity, I thought, well, cybersecurity, it's all kind of the same thing, and then you realized, it's such a broad topic. And then you can go a mile wide, but then when you pick one of those topics, then you can go a mile or two deeper on that specific area. So, and it's every week I'm talking to somebody from, it's looking at similar problems from completely different angles and perspectives. And it's right. There's never a dull moment from the technology, from the process side, but also from the threat side. These bad actors out there, they continue to evolve and develop their methods of attack. So it's a very interesting space to be in. And talking to people like yourself helps me kind of learn and keep abreast and kind of somehow organize my thoughts on the topic. So it's fun doing a podcast. You also have your website, which is backupcentral.com. And you are the Chief Technology Evangelist. And that's another question I wanted to ask you. What is a Chief Technology Evangelist? I know what a televangelist is, but
it's funny. My daughter, I have two adult daughters, and my oldest daughter just noticed my title yesterday, and she thought it was hilarious. She was just like, she's like, "You're evangelist. This is hilarious," Basically, it's a marketing position, right? Mm-hmm. But this that I'm doing right now, this is being a chief technical evangelist, right? So basically, I explain why what we do is important, and why the way we do it is a really good way to do it. I'm not sales. And I'm not even product marketing. So I'm not saying, I want to talk to you about, the Druva SaaS, backup for Microsoft 365 and why these 10 features are better than those 10 features. It's not that. It's number one. The number one topic I end up explaining is the one we started with, which is why you want to back up the 365. So, for example, if you look at all of the 365 customers, the latest stat I saw was, I don't want to give a number, but the vast majority of them do not back up their data. And then you look at, there was finally at least one, there's been a public incident on G Suite. There's been a couple of public incidents on Salesforce. There's been many on AWS that prove the point that there is no backup unless you make one. There was finally a really big one on 365, and it was something that happened to KPMG. So KPMG, again, well-meaning administrator, meant to, what did he want to do? He wanted to clear out, again, I don't know why, but for some reason he wanted to clear out the private messages in Microsoft Teams for a particular user. And they were using this feature that 365 refers to as retention policies, which some people tout as a backup alternative, which it is not, and this proves that point. So they had a default retention of like 90 days, and they wanted these messages gone. I don't know why. And I could come up with all sorts of
put your expert witness hat on and guess.
Yeah. But they had this retention policy. So what they did was you can't delete data that's in a retention policy. So what you do is you make another retention policy and you move that user into the retention policy with a retention setting of 0.
Right.
And that's how you do it. Except he did the opposite. He moved I think it was some ridiculous number with way too many digits, essentially all KPMG users, except for the one that he meant to save the data. He moved all of them into this new policy, and boom, all of their private messages were gone.
Now, I think we all know that the feeling that he felt when he recognized what he did. And what a terrible feeling that is. It's just like surreal.
I've done that. I've done those stupid things, right?
Wait a minute. There's got to be a way to back up out of this. There's got to be a way. Wait a minute. I can't believe I just, that poor guy.
Yeah. And I do really feel for that person. At the same time, it illustrates this issue that 365, it had the real challenge, and the reason why I bring up 365 a lot is because it has a lot of what I would think of as features that mimic backup. Mm-hmm. So you can go into your 365 account and you can quote restore deleted emails or restore deleted files. That implies that you're getting them from a backup. 365 and these other SaaS applications, they're really just really big special purpose databases. Mm-hmm. And when you delete an email, it's really, that email is just a database record, right? And when you delete that email and there's a retention setting that says it's supposed to be kept for 30 days, it just sets a flag in that record, and it says this email is now deleted, which means it doesn't show up in your inbox. And when you say restore, it just unsets that flag, and now it shows up again. You didn't restore anything. And that's why I think a lot of people think that there are features that simply don't exist. So that's why I end up explaining that. So just to go back to your earlier question, this is what I do. I just explain this kind of stuff to people.
And in addition to podcasts and websites, do you participate in events, or what else do you do?
I speak at seminars and things like that. You remember seminars? Like people would go, groups of people would go to large.
That is
groups,
so like
right?
5 years ago. No, it was just a couple of years ago. It was like 5 years ago. Yeah.
It seems like forever. Yeah.
I'm actually supposed to be going to an industry event down in San Diego in April, but at the end of April. But right now, they are sending out queries. What's the likelihood of you attending? And they're trying to kind of figure out, is it a go or no go situation, right?
I went to AWS reInvent in Vegas in, was it November? I think it was. And it's a really big show. Normally it's about 60,000 people. They scaled it down to be only 15,000, and they still sold out. But it was a bit weird to be, everybody had to be vaccinated, right? You had to be vaccinated to go. But it was really weird to be in a building with tens of thousands of people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, that's it's amazing how quickly things changed. And hopefully we'll be amazed at how quickly they get back to normal, knock on wood. Yeah. Well, hey, Curtis, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot in terms of, you can't assume that your cloud provider is backing up your data. In fact, you should probably assume that they're not. Check the fine print, ask them. And even if they do have that service, you might want to check for another service provider just to kind of diversify your risk and, cover your bases, right?
Absolutely. That 3-2-1 rule just look at whatever it is you think you're doing for backup and see if it applies, if it meets that most basic definition of backup. And if it doesn't, then I would investigate, which it probably doesn't. I would investigate a third-party service like Druva's platform.
Excellent. Well, Curtis, again, thank you for being on the show. I'm going to put links to your podcast and to your website and to Druva in the show notes. And I'd like to wish you an amazing 2022.
You too.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.